Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're digging into one of the most common pieces of health advice out there. You gotta eat less salt. Sounds simple, right? Well, it turns out there's a huge scientific debate brewing just under the surface, asking a really big question. Is this rule that's supposed to be for everyone actually right for everyone? So here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll look at the advice you've heard a million times. Then we'll see the science that backs it up. After that, we dive into the big challenge to that idea, explore a totally different way of looking at risk, and then finally, we'll try to figure out what it all means. All right, let's jump right in. We're starting with the official story on salt, the message that's been the gold standard in public health for decades. I mean, you see it everywhere, don't you? This one-size-fits-all rule has become a basic cornerstone of healthy eating guides all over the world. The thinking is pretty straightforward. If cutting salt is good for people with high blood pressure, well, it must be good for everybody. And this right here, this is the whole reason we're doing this explainer. Because a growing and pretty loud group of researchers are asking if we've made things a little too simple. Have we oversimplified the role of this absolutely essential nutrient? And maybe, just maybe, caused some other problems along the way. Now, before we get into the big controversy, you really have to understand the case against salt. And let me tell you, it's a powerful one. It's built on some very clear numbers and what seems like a totally logical cause and effect. So big health organizations like the American Heart Association, they're not just saying, hey, maybe cut back a bit. No, they're pushing for a major reduction. Their perfect optimal goal is just 1,500 milligrams of sodium a day. Let me put that in perspective for you. That's less than 3/4 of a single teaspoon of salt for your entire day's worth of food. And now, let's look at reality. The average American, they're eating over 3,300 milligrams a day. That's more than double the ideal target. So you can see this huge gap between the official advice and how we're actually living. The logic behind the low salt rule is super easy to follow. It goes like this. You eat a lot of salt, that raises your blood pressure. And since we all know that high blood pressure is a huge risk factor for heart attacks and strokes, well then cutting salt should cut down on those terrible events. Makes sense, right? And wow, the data here really seems to seal the deal. This is from a massive review of studies, and it links high sodium to some seriously scary numbers, significantly higher risks for a whole bunch of really bad health outcomes. I mean, you look at these stats, and they form the solid foundation of the low salt argument. It's pretty compelling stuff. But just when you think the case is closed, this whole other scientific story has popped up, and it's arguing that things are way, way more complicated than we thought. And here's what's so interesting. This isn't some fringe idea from a random blog. This quote is from a 2020 review in the European Heart Journal. That's a huge deal in the cardiology world. They're directly challenging the guidelines, saying, hey, maybe the evidence isn't there, maybe it's not even practical, and maybe it doesn't even work. So where is this coming from? Well, a lot of the controversy is being pushed by researchers like Dr. James DiGalantonio. He's a cardiovascular research scientist, and he claims that the original studies that all this advice is built on, like the super famous InterSalt study from 1988, were actually flawed because of a few really unusual groups of people. And here it is, the heart of the argument. The original take on the InterSalt study, which is still influencing guidelines today, it found that clear link. More salt, higher blood pressure. But then statisticians went back and reanalyzed everything. And when they took out 4 small, unique populations, the result totally flipped. For the other 48 groups in the study, that link just vanished. Okay, so this whole debate has led researchers to come up with a completely different way of thinking about how salt affects us. It's a model that throws that less is always better idea right out the window. It's called the J-shaped curve. So instead of a straight line where risk just keeps dropping as you eat less salt, this model says there's a sweet spot. It argues that your risk is lowest at a moderate salt intake, and then, get this, it actually starts to go up again if you eat too little. And you can see that idea right here in the data from a study in the American Journal of Hypertension. Look at that. It found that the lowest risk for heart problems was in that moderate range, somewhere between 2,500 and 6,000 milligrams a day. And the really critical part is that the risk went up not just at super high levels, but at very low levels too. So you have to ask, why would risk go up when you eat less salt? Well, the folks who support this J-curve model say that when your salt intake gets too low, your body basically freaks out and fights back. It can kick off this whole chain reaction of hormonal and metabolic changes, stuff that could actually be pretty harmful in the long run.
So, we've got two completely different scientific stories, and both of them have data to back them up. Where on earth does that leave us? How are we supposed to make sense of all this?
This chart just nails the whole debate perfectly. On the one hand, you have the official optimal goal way down at 1,500 milligrams. Then you have what the average American actually eats, sitting right in the middle at 3,300. And then you've got this proposed sweet spot from the J-curve research, this huge range from 3 to 6,000 milligrams, which, funnily enough, is right where most people already are. So let's be clear. The big takeaway here is not that you can eat all of the salt you want. Almost everyone agrees that extremely high sodium intake is a bad idea. The real fight, the heart of the debate, is about the low end of that curve. Is 1,500 milligrams really the best target for everybody, or could it actually be harmful for some of us? And that leaves us with this really provocative final thought from one of the main voices challenging the old ideas. Dr. Dina Colantonio is basically asking, in our laser focus on hating salt, did we miss the real villain? Could something else in our diet, like all that refined sugar, actually be the bigger threat? It's a huge question that forces us to look at the whole diet, not just one little crystal.